It makes it. He blessed his body now in a second. Sorry, do you want to?
Sure. And I'm Brian McCrath.
Stefan, hi. You're speaking now, aren't you?
Yes.
How do I pronounce your second name? If you sit between Brian. Stefan. Can I ask you, Stefan, you wouldn't sit there just to keep the line up as it is, and this is Brian McCrath. Okay, hi. You're over this side, all right? You have me all conscious of how to say your name now, so I hope I get it right. Now, folks, if you can take your seats, we'll get this session underway, because while this session is very important, and so is the afternoon, there's an important piece in between called lunch and networking, so clearly we don't want to delay that for you. I'm going to give a short introduction and then let our speakers talk to the subject of living the Dublin Innovation Declaration. And we have 4 speakers. I hope I get all the names right, but Annette Pelkamaki, Julia Cinnamon, Stephen Shepherd, and Brian McCrae. Now, in relation to this session, the focus is on living the Dublin Innovation Declaration. And what I would draw your attention to, if I may, is page 45 of the little books that you have, which gives the 10 principles of that declaration, the new set of commandments we would hope to see happening in Europe and locally around Open Innovation 2.0. And one of the things that I'm interested in hearing the speakers talk about from their own experience and their own background is how all, some, or none of these have been happening in the work that they're involved in. And they vary from developing new business models for the European Union to things that can happen more locally, like giving priority to quadruple helix innovation, supporting high expectation entrepreneurship, and driving intersectional innovation. So in the questions and answers, we're looking for ideas of how those can be practically achieved as we go forward. Now, I want to start briefly by giving an insight, because not all innovation is about technology. But a lot of innovation today does involve technology, and particularly digital technology. And last year, Dublin City, as part of its contribution to this open innovation growth within Europe, published its own digital master plan. And I have a short infographic to give you an insight into what's involved in that digital master plan. And in Ireland, we have a TV show where you say, roll it there, Colette, or you used to, and Gay Byrne used to be involved. But the guy rolling stuff today is Mick, so I'm hoping Mick will roll it now for me. So the infographic on the digital master plan. Now, I'm not going to do long introductions to speakers. If you want to read their bios, they're all in the little booklet. So I'm going to call first from the European Commission on Annette Pelkamaki to speak to us.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. It's a great pleasure and honor to be here in Dublin, and I think discussing of open innovation, either 1.0 or 2.0. But especially now, I think that the request was, I think, really to assess how the kind of last year's product, which is called Dublin Innovation Declaration, matters for European Commission. Perhaps trying to put this kind of, let's say, very interesting document in kind of a context, I think, of course, I go back to year 2000, and it was kind of a European Council whenever they were agreeing so-called Lisbon strategy. And I think it was kind of our overall aim was to get Europe up and running. And I think, of course, there was a kind of recognition that I think Europe is lagging behind, especially compared to the US, but also I think that many other emerging economies already at that time. And I think that then it was kind of overall goal to get Europe as the most competitive knowledge-based economy or economic region in the world by 2010. Of course, I remember the discussions afterwards that I think that it was really feasible, that I think that we are putting all kind of powers which are lying either in the Commission or the European Union on the member states level or being them on local and regional level. And I think because it was very much kind of a huge coordination exercise. It was really trying to align our policies that they are really starting to deliver. And I think we are really in kind of climbing in terms of the competitiveness of the Europe in general, but of course I think that the European companies and European economies. And I think that now we have had the last 5 years kind of a revised version of the Lisbon strategy in place. And I think, of course, the recognition was, I think, 5 years that I think, unfortunately, we were not able really to achieve what we were aiming at, let's say now, 15 years ago. And I think that it was then called now Europe 2020 strategy. It's consisting of 7 flagship initiatives, and perhaps relevant for today's discussion are at least 3 of them. First is Innovation Union, where, of course, I think that now it was kind of a policy objectives that are now behind the Horizon 2020, which is research innovation program. And I think that it's creating that kind of 80 billion kind of a pot of money that we can really use for different type of the innovation related activities. Of course, then I think to put perhaps today, and I think that whenever it's Robert Madeleine, and I think that Bror is here as well, I think, of course, I think this is very much, I think, perhaps more on kind of a online business models. It's ICT driven much more than perhaps legacy industries that I am now representing, not anymore the ICT side of the, let's say, house. So that I'm nowadays for enterprise and industry, and then used to work in an information society and nowadays Connect. But of course I can see very huge difference, I think, that how the innovation is perceived in different type of the industrial sectors in Europe. And that's why I think that we have been also having kind of a digital agenda for more or less really seeing that how this kind of, let's say, digital single market should really be established, and how this start to generate certain kind of public goods, and then I think also economic success stories in creating that kind of a right type of the infrastructure, right type of the regulatory environment, and right type of, let's say, creation of the content, and then I think all kind of applications that are really filling the pipes. And now I think that we are also having this industrial policy flagship, which was consisting of 4 big pillars. And first is investments in innovation. Might be saying that it's perhaps more linear way of seeing that how innovation is taking place in kind of industries like steel, aluminium, car industry, shipbuilding, wherever. But I think that, of course, I think that it's very much now, I think that the joint effort in Commission to see that how this kind of innovation is really established, and then I think that rooted in our policies. And of course, I think that if we are now thinking that what was kind of an overall goal of Barroso II Commission was really create smart, sustainable and inclusive growth. And I think that's still valid, and I guess that whenever the new Commission is, which is emerging out of this political process, I truly believe that the same type of the overall objectives are still valid, even if I think that we are perhaps redefining our policy instruments a bit differently. But thinking of, let's say, where we are today's situation in terms of our policies, and I think that they're now trying to reflect that in relation to Dublin Innovation Declaration, Of course, I think that already I think that in ICT part, but nowadays also I think perhaps on the, let's say, the more traditional industrial part, we are starting to see that I think that we are really shifting the focus from research development, perhaps like Richard Schraub was pointing out, and more on innovation. So I think we are now ready to go closer to the market than perhaps we have been so far been able to do. Of course, I think that then thinking in terms of how this kind of innovation process, this is not as linear as it has been, but I think that how really to start to see the interaction, and I think as you are calling it, mashing up the process of different kind of disciplines. And I think that you can easily see that we are having kind of cross-sectoral approaches on very many issues, and trying really to see that different kind of disciplines and sectors are opening up the mindset also in other fields. Of course, I think that all different kind of new business models have been, let's say, strengthening the understanding that I think that end users are also really key players in kind of innovation process, and I think that how you are really creating the business. And I think that even if perhaps this quadruple helix innovation sounds a bit academic, but I think that of course I think that if you are trying to make common sense, I think that if you are identifying those 4 different kind of stakeholders that are needed in that kind of process, being them industry, government, academia, citizens, I guess that makes a lot of sense, and I guess that there is a open mindset nowadays. I think that in European Union try to identify how to make certain kind of political conclusions out of this kind of observation, and I think recognition that I think that if we really want to be head of the game, I think that we have to be open also for that kind of new ways and to see the kind of how innovation is going to happen. As said, I think that we are having kind of a lot of different kind of policy instruments in place. We are having, like Robert was referring, a grand coalition that was announced by President Barroso and then Commissioner Vice President Neelie Kroes. I think we have had, I think also the kind of a Small Business Act. We are having entrepreneurship action plan. There are web entrepreneurs, there are digital entrepreneurship, so that it's kind of both supply and demand side type of the things. And of course, I think that whenever coming from now DG Enterprise, where we are dealing with the kind of more traditional industries, and I think that of course for them ICT solutions are really certain kind of a must at today's situation, so that I think that they are streamlining their processes, and I think that they're trying to find out their way that I think that they can transform their own business models as well as perhaps their product and service portfolios in a way that I think that they are becoming much more competitive in Europe. Then the notion of open platforms, I think of course helps to sell often the intangible products or service worldwide, and I think this question of really that we are looking at the kind of a market creation and user co-creation that are very important, especially for web services. But I think that these are not only, I think that for online business models, but I guess that it's certain thing that we are having the challenge how to really familiarize, and I think that to get also kind of the businesses widely to look at these kind of opportunities. And of course, whenever the question of entrepreneurship, and this is something that perhaps we are seeing now certain kind of a positive development. We are having altogether 21 to 3 million SMEs in Europe. They represent 99.8% of all the companies. And I think that if we are really thinking that where the kind of jobs in today's and I think tomorrow's Europe are coming, I'm pretty sure that this is question of that these SMEs are ready to grow, ready to take risk, and ready to really succeed and even fail. And I think that the kind of a whole of the idea of we are making the second chance real option, and I think that it's something that where we have a lot to learn from the US. I think that how this kind of entrepreneurial business culture is supposed to be established. Okay, if we are then looking at kind of a vision of open innovation 2.0, I think that in a way, I think the elements that are presented there makes a lot of sense in terms of assessing where we are in today's situation in our own policy design. Looking at the smart, sustainable cities, where are the kind of, let's say, environment for different type of new business models and new business opportunities to be created. And I think, of course, this is kind of and I think it was Rura, I guess, that who was saying that I think we are needing certain type of the processes, but also I think the environment where talent can meet talent and then where kind of innovation can really take place. And as well as whenever it's said that it's a kind of a cultural issue, and then of course it's a question that we are moving out of the laboratories and trying to establish and see the ecosystems as I think described in your background documentation and being also I think a part of the declaration. Of course I think we have already I think that been through kind of already mentioned living labs, open innovation, clusters, networks, all different kind of social innovation type of things. They are there. Are they mainstreaming? Obviously not. But of course I think this is something where we are understanding that all different kind of innovation networks, whatever form they are taking, are creating that kind of a cultural background or kind of a platform where we have to really see that I think that something starts really to happen. And of course we really recognize that new innovation needs kind of a lot of human capital, managerial skills. It's a question of how we organizing our, so to say, let's say not only policy making. Policy making is perhaps in this respect mainly to create the framework conditions. And I think then it's very much the question that I think that all other stakeholders are really taking best out of the kind of framework conditions, and that's where we are at the moment. And thinking of the industrial drivers today, of course I think that there are need for different kind of breakthrough innovations, both in technological terms, but also I think in terms of that we are really breaking the silos. We are trying to create that kind of intersection between disciplines and stakeholder boundaries. And innovation and entrepreneurship are going very closely hand in hand, and I think that that's perhaps where we are seeing now, I think that we are starting to focus on more on perhaps SMEs than to make sure that I think that our traditional national champions are surviving through the difficult times, because I think that's perhaps the kind of a legacy of the European policies that I think that we haven't been really letting any kind of a destruction to happen. I think that's, we are not freeing the resources, we are not freeing kind of new kind of business avenues. But in all, I guess that the challenge is that how the kind of policymakers in Brussels and also including the national governments, how they really reach out to the kind of SME level. What are the instruments that we can really provide for them? And of course that has been kind of our question. And I think then also understanding the regulatory environment, whenever we were now looking at where we are in the free movement of goods, we started to see also that kind of a new business models that are servitization of the products or the manufacturing. And also I think that the digitalization of manufacturing, so that you are having very many different kind of trends now emerging that are also to be tested, that whether our regulatory environment is fit for the purpose for today's and tomorrow's kind of new business models. And of course I think that now we are making this kind of a Commission innovation scoreboard, trying really follow how different member states are doing in terms of innovation, and of course then comparing ourselves as a Europe with the US, Japan, Korea, etc. And of course the same notion that I think it was coming from Bruce's presentation, that innovation is very spiky in regional terms. We are having kind of innovation leaders that were mentioned, that I think that who the countries that are really doing good or regions that are doing good. But of course then comes the question that I think that we have to, as a kind of policymakers, make sure that I think that this kind of let's say strengthening the already strong regions is one way, but of course I think we are having the obligation really to make sure that I think that we are finding the ways for all different kind of regions to make their kind of a future also in this European Union. And of course, I think there is then kind of instruments available for us. I already mentioned Horizon 2020. To my mind, I think that compared to the kind of old world where we had the Framework Program 7 and then the separate SIP program, Competitiveness and Innovation Program, now we are having all kind of instruments in one single framework. If we are able to use together with the member states and all the stakeholders the best out of these instruments, I think nothing prevents us really to be supportive for the kind of a very innovative innovation models, including Open Innovation 2.0. We are having the SME instrument. We try to really focus that I think we are reaching out to the kind of SMEs and making them as easy as possible to use also that kind of innovation funding through the kind of EU funds. But perhaps more importantly, try to make sure that I think whatever we do all together in Europe, we are also, I think, that very much aligning ourselves the terms what the member states and the private sector is doing, that we are having the participation from the private sector, and then also I think the kind of regional policies are aligned for that. And that's why we are having the smart specialization in our cohesion or the regional funds. And I think this is the true test case now for the kind of regions of Europe to define their own strengths that they want to build on. And I think that that's where perhaps the innovation comes to the building picture, that I think that they are really, I think that responsibility collectively for all kind of public and private stakeholders at the moment. And then we are having so-called COSME program, which is the competitiveness of SMEs. And I think there are the new financial instruments, being the venture capital or loan guarantees. And I think that they are kind of instruments that have been, I think, widely used. And I think that we are quite happy that they have been very successful instruments to really run out this kind of innovation in Europe. Altogether, this innovation ecosystem explained, I think that what I think that is trying to identify all different kind of types of the innovation, like also Richard Straub was defining. I think that they are all needed and they are part of the picture. And of course, I think that open innovation definitely is perhaps the growing part of that kind of innovation landscape. And to understanding it as an ecosystem, I think that gives us certain kind of, let's say, tools to assess what type of the activities and instruments are best fit for the purpose. Thank you.
And our second speaker is Judy Cinnamon, who's the Chief Executive of Enterprise Ireland, which is Ireland's small business and enterprise national agency. Julie.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. I'm delighted to join you this morning for this conference. Basically, what I'm going to do for the next 15 or 20 minutes is talk about Entrepreneurial Ireland, covering first how entrepreneurial it is, why it is so important for Ireland to be entrepreneurial, where do our entrepreneurs come from, what makes us so entrepreneurial, and then lastly, optimising our entrepreneurial potential. So just in terms of the first point as to how entrepreneurial we are, basically we have been ranked internationally as #1 country for doing business in 2013 by Forbes, so pretty strong endorsement. And #2 in terms of the rate of early stage entrepreneurship, and that's from the GEM report, and #9 across the European 28. So by international measures, continuously coming up strong. And then a very strong percentage, and this is obviously driven by the size of the country, of our startups, which actually from an early stage have to export. So a much more outward-looking type of company being started in Ireland than the average internationally. Just in terms of the level of international activity that we have, there's 15,000 startups in 2013. And this is really the highest level of business since the onset of the economic downturn. So really important to see those numbers turning up. And in May alone, there were 1,783 new companies registered, so that's 107 per day. So we can see a great upturn in the level of entrepreneurship relative to what we've had. And obviously, again, the international dimension of that coming through. Construction, good to see an increase again of the activity in that side, having had a fairly lean period. Just in terms of, does it really matter, is really the question many people will ask as to whether or not we're entrepreneurial or not. And really, startups create 2/3 of all the new jobs. So from an Irish economic recovery perspective, it's really important, and Dublin is obviously the key focus of that in terms of the largest city, and given the small scale of the country, it's export-driven sales which are going to develop the jobs, which in turn will drive the national and regional prosperity. So really from an Irish perspective, it is really important, and the mission in Enterprise Ireland is to work with entrepreneurs and with existing companies, and that's about maximising the growth and the export potential of the companies with a view to maximising job creation within Ireland. Just put numbers on it, we have about 5,000 clients at present, and the level of exports, 18 billion, which and 300,000 jobs directly and indirectly, so it's roughly a 1-to-1. So there's about 175,000 jobs directly in our clients and about 125,000 indirectly. So moving on to where do the entrepreneurs come from, and the most important source of entrepreneurs historically has been from existing companies, which will be no surprise to people in the room, from both indigenous companies and the multinational sector. Third level is coming in at about 12% of our entrepreneurs nationally, and I'm talking here about Enterprise Ireland supported high potential startups. So we're supporting about just in excess of 100 per annum. And that third level grouping is a really important focus of government policy in terms of the amount of funding which has been put into third level and really trying to maximise the impact from a state funding perspective. In terms of the overseas side, which again is important, we have 34% of the companies which are coming from overseas entrepreneurs, and 15% is coming from overseas entrepreneurs, and that again is a specific focus in terms of supporting and attracting, and this is an endorsement of Ireland's attractiveness as a location. Historically, what we were finding was the entrepreneurs that were coming into Ireland were effectively coming in, the overseas entrepreneurs, it was Irish people returning home to set up a company. Today, at least half of those overseas entrepreneurs are coming in and they have no connection with Ireland. So the reason why they're coming to Ireland, and hopefully I can move on the screen here, hopefully they're coming to Ireland because they're finding that it's a very good source of an entrepreneurial place to do business. So in terms of, just going back to the multinationals, and I'll not go through this in the interest of time, but multinational companies have been a very rich source historically of companies. In terms of, we have a 10 million fund dedicated to fund overseas entrepreneurs setting up in Ireland, and those are coming in from all over Europe and Argentina, the States, etc. Just to give you a picture as to what a number of those are like, Mainstay Technology, and this is an electrode that cures chronic back pain. And again, this is one which set up in Ireland, and because of the licensing laws in the UK and the US, we're increasingly been found attractive as a source of overseas entrepreneurs coming in, setting up, establishing into the European market, and then backing into the US market. In terms of Beastmark, and this is two Italian guys who basically decided to come to Ireland, and this is their wording as opposed to ours. They came here because Ireland is one of the best places in the world for a digital startup. And the ecosystem, you know, within a couple of miles of the convention centre here, increasingly growing up in terms of the venture capitalists, the accelerators, the number of young starts, the multinational companies that are very proactively working with the indigenous startups. So that's increasingly a key part of the offer from an Irish perspective. In terms of Platform One, Irish expats coming to Ireland, and really what they're doing is using Ireland, and because of the very strong base of technology companies in Ireland, they felt this was the right place to set up their company. Subject close to my heart, this is an area where we're definitely punching below our weight. 7 in 2012, 7 of in excess of 100 startups were from females. It has been a specific focus of government policy in terms of trying to drive it. Last year we hit the lofty number of 15. It's work in progress, still plenty of scope to grow that figure further, and it's really about using all of the talent available to the country and maximising that. You know, companies like Videoad, which is really a software technology to help people produce their own video ads. So really exciting, innovative companies coming up. In terms of the innovation agenda, it's really about translating what's happening in the third level, and I know we're going to hear from Brian later this morning. But over the last number of years, government have continued to fund the third level, and really the ask of agencies like Enterprise Ireland is, how do you get a better return on that investment? And it's really important to the whole question of open innovation in terms of getting everybody working together, and we have a number of programmes in terms of being able to drive that. Collaboration between industry and the third level. It's about maximising the commercialising at company level. It's about building international linkages, and Auntie has talked about the Horizon 2020 and the funding available and trying to maximise that, and then getting in-company R&D working to maximum effect. And last week here we had the launch of KTI, which is really about transferring the knowledge that's within the third level out to existing and to new companies. And just to put figures on it, in 2005 the number of technology transfers recorded was 12. In 2013 that had grown to 119. So again, really important to grow this and very important to this task. Just in terms of some of the projects, REMPAD was one of the projects that not only was a spin-out from third level, it also was using, it's a female entrepreneur, but it really is addressing the Alzheimer's market, where you have software which is really about helping to target that. Smart Wall Paint, a more recent one using technology which was linked up with DIT, and that's, you know, effectively to be able to use a whiteboard on any surface. OpenNet, done a number of open innovation programs with Athlone Institute of Technology, and Dairymaster, a company in Tralee which has done very exciting innovation programs with ITT. So increasingly this is really important. So what makes Ireland so entrepreneurial? We're ranked 15 out of 185 companies. IMD, our countries, IMD has said we're first for flexibility and adaptability, first for attitudes towards globalisation and obviously driven by the small country, second for unit labour costs, and third for availability of skilled labour. So a number of things which really help our sale. In terms of the culture and the number of, we've a unique mix with all of the multinationals, many of whom are here today, and also a very strong ecosystem for entrepreneurial companies. Pro-business government culture, and then funding has been available, and that has really grown in recent years with the development of the venture capital and business angel communities to support it. Just in terms of where we have a large number of multinationals, and in the interest of time I'm not going to go through this, but most of you have 9 of the top global ICT companies, 15 of the 20 top medical device companies, etc. So a very strong base of multinationals which really has spawned out many of those entrepreneurs that we are currently dealing with. The ecosystem, and it's everything from the VCs, the mentors, the serial entrepreneurs that we are increasingly engaging with, who are selling out, coming back in to start new companies, etc. Just in terms of the funding available, over the last number of years, the government have supported a number of venture capital funds, which Enterprise Ireland has been funding jointly with the private sector, a really key part of the infrastructure. And it isn't all about money and the direct ecosystem. Obviously, Ireland as a good place to live and the culture within Ireland is really important in terms of attracting particularly the overseas entrepreneur, and increasingly as Irish people are deciding to start up companies, a key ask is why stay in Ireland, why not move overseas? So the quality of life issues are obviously really important. In terms of optimising our potential, the feedback that we get consistently from our overseas network is that all of the reasons why Ireland was successful over the last couple of decades are still in existence. The doors are open, there's a very pro-Irish reception from customers abroad, and a very high recognition of the innovation that we have, which is basically changing lives every day of the week. And just in terms of giving you an insight into some of those, if you go into the Houses of Parliament in London, what you're going to find is Irish technology, which is effectively powering the access to the Houses of Parliament. I hope none of you have used this software, which is used by the British police when prisoners are released to basically tag them, Irish technology. For anybody crossing borders in many countries, it's Irish technology, which is basically reading the biometrics, etc. And again, day on, a very successful company. And increasingly, what we're finding is the growth of these, and I could go on for a long time going through the successes. TrustEv is one that recently got great recognition in the US for the technology, and it's about the identities of millions of online customers and security in that space. So what we have is a group of companies that are clued into what's happening in the market, and also working in with the third level here and with other companies to avail of the opportunities. There's a question mark as to whether there will be a World Cup in Qatar. For many companies in the Irish side, we actually don't care. We hope we will be there, but the stadia are being built, and Mercury Engineering in Dublin has got a contract. It'll be the first ever solar-powered, climate-controlled football stadium. It will have to be climate-controlled, but Irish technology, and this is smart technology. And what we have, one of the real benefits of all the multinationals that have come to Ireland over the years is the demanding standards that were required in order to build the plants. And now what we have within the construction sector, people like Mercury Engineering who can win business all over the world on the strength of what they've done in the domestic market. So there will be Irish technology in Qatar, even if there isn't a World Cup. In fact, I was in Abu Dhabi about 3 months ago on a trade mission, and we were sitting at a lunch table, and there was a guy there from Abu Dhabi discussing the World Cup and said, it's never going to happen in Qatar, so we'll wait and see. I'm not going to... European Space Agency, again, there's funding available not just through Enterprise Ireland, but this is Radisson's, and it's a technology company in Cork enabling blood analysis aboard spacecraft, and it's been funded using European Space Agency funding as well. So it's really important that we're maximising this. And Aerogen, really interesting company, basically it takes vaccines and it's converted it to an aerosol. So for babies in the third world in particular that are too weak to take an injection into their arm, put a mask on, they get the vaccine. Absolutely world-changing technology. And this is the link in terms of innovation, which has been strongly driven by what's happening in the third level and been then run out through entrepreneurial people who are prepared to take the plunge and actually go it alone. Just in terms of, so we're more experienced than ever. We have a dynamic economy. We have a lot of pluses going for us. So in terms of doing business in Ireland and starting up your company, it probably is the time to do it. And just to finish, what I'm going to do is show you a very brief video, hopefully. And this isn't going to... Can you play that from the back? Is that?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, okay. So the very strong link between what's happening in Enterprise Ireland and what's happening in the third level. Obviously, it's a key and growing part of it, and the blend between the multinationals and people who have the desire to go it alone is really driving probably the strongest group of startup companies that we've seen at any stage. So from the point of view of Entrepreneurial Ireland and Entrepreneurial Dublin, it's a good time to be an entrepreneur. Thank you very much, everybody, and we'll just finish with this.
Mick, can you actually run that video back there? I'm wondering. Should be just a matter of clicking on it. It's linked to the internet, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
He's a magician. I'll give it a second just while we're waiting on that. I think anybody who isn't convinced that Dublin is a good place to start business, I better leave the room now after that input. And secondly, there's some discounts available for anyone who starts a business before they leave here today with Enterprise Ireland. The other thing I'd like to kind of just say is that open innovation, you know, there were a couple of examples of companies working in London. I think Mark Kleinman, my opposite number from London, is down there. And one of the things about open innovation is cities need to work together to promote the interaction, and we greatly value our links with London, our closest neighbour. In fact, myself and Julie both originally come from Northern Ireland, so we're actually even closer. But those links of open innovation aren't just between companies and universities, or within companies and universities, but also between cities, because that's where a lot of the growth is happening. I don't think we've any luck on the... We have to click it from here? Sorry, let me just check. We'll have one go at it. It's just... No, we have it. Thanks.
Everyone knows what the people are like. They're hardworking, they play hard, they work hard.
You have a quick access to England, to the US, so it's kind of a central point, I think, in Europe to start up a business.
Already you have Google, Facebook, Zynga, LinkedIn, Twitter, PayPal, Microsoft, the list is endless. So if I'm a startup and I'm wondering where should I locate in Europe, one of the biggest challenges I'm going to face is finding talent. And in the case of Ireland, that's here in abundance.
When we started Profitero, we actually had a choice to move company to UK or maybe to continental Europe, but we decided to stay here. And we see that since then, the help that startups are getting from the government, and it really helps.
You have this atmosphere of entrepreneurship, and you feel that you are supported by the government.
Enterprise Ireland network outside of Ireland is really great. We work very closely with UK and US offices.
Ireland is a really energised community, and to start up a company here is looked on and supported so well, not just by Enterprise Ireland and the government, but by the people. Everybody wants you to succeed here.
Thank you. Now, our next speaker is Dr. Stefan Scheppers, who is the Director General, or has been the Director General of the EIPA, and has also been an advisor to the EU Commissioner and different individual governments. Stefan. I think
It's not working.
should be working. Okay,
That's it.
I have it.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for the invitation to address you on the topic of innovation and governance. After this upbeat presentation, I'm afraid I'm going to spoil the pleasure. When you look at the quadruple helix, there is indeed governance. But I like to ask the question, have we properly analyzed the role of governance? What do we mean by it? And how does it function in the innovation value chain? Indeed, does it function in an innovation value chain, or is it an obstacle? We've had 2 lost decades in Europe for innovation, which is proven by our declining competitiveness. It's not research and development capacities which are lacking, and it's not funding which is lacking. It's not interest of citizens either. So why is it that we've had 2 lost decades? Why is it that in this interesting introductory presentation, Martin only refers to local governments who are innovative and takes examples from local governments? These questions, ladies and gentlemen, were at the background of the creation of the high-level group on innovation policy management. And Richard also pointed out the importance of management in private or management in public sector, which is just a different word for governance. You see, I warned you, it was provocative, and already the red light is flashing all the time. Shall I stop? We focus, the high-level group was an initiative of the Competitiveness Council presidency under Poland 2 years ago, and I have the honor to coach it. And we focus on what are the framework conditions to facilitate innovation in Europe. What is the ecosystem which we lead, not single, but ecosystems, plural, at European level, at national level, at local level, in governments and in business, and how can they interact? And also, how can we measure output? Because I'm afraid we take the view that the EU has become too much focused on inputs, but not on outputs. No, sorry, how does this work? There it is. It's very innovative. You have to push the backward button to go forward. Let me look at the functions of government. The very first function of government is and has always been capital allocation. Yet today, capital allocation clearly favors traditional sectors, not to mention transactional capital in the financial services sector. So there's enough money around in Europe, it's just in the wrong places from a point of view of innovation. A second function of government is, of course, always been security for citizens and economic actors. Third function has been regulation and discipline. Now, it is true that parts of the European system are innovative oriented. But what about the other parts, which equally happily create the obstacles for the innovation, which the other part is trying to promote? This is not an individual failure. These are system failures which we experience today in the European Union. System failures which depend on the method of governance, on structures and procedures from the age of the typewriter. And I mean what I say, because the European Union and its basic structure and procedures were established in the 1950s and have never fundamentally adapted since. They are really out of synchronization with the needs of a modern economy and a modern society. We need, ladies and gentlemen, creative destruction of institutions, not just in the economic sector. Let us take a look backwards. Where does our present political order come from? It was established in parallel with the printing press. The modern political order, the modern state as we know it, dates from the Westphalian Peace Conference, which followed the technology innovation of the printing press. It was the printing press which allowed the development of the modern bureaucracy and organization and procedures. It was that organization which created the framework conditions for the industrial economy and for new inventions such as the steam engine to be organized into economic added value. That basic governance concept we still operate with at the time of innovation, at a time when these exciting new technology developments enter our world. And they do not enter, they have entered our world. Our economies have changed and continue to change all the time, and citizens' attitudes change with it. There are various interpretations of the outcomes of the European elections, but it depends on the perspective which you take. So what we need are radical shifts in governance, organization, and methodology. System changes, that's what we need. And we are far from it. We lost 2 decades of competitiveness in Europe, and we lost them because our attention was not focused on the 4th dimension of the quadruple helix. Our attention was focused on the infamous Lisbon Treaty, which was really nothing else than a reshift of power between European Union institutions and between member states, but not an innovation of governance. And that's the reason, in my view, why the European Union, which once was a force for competitiveness, establishing a common market, establishing a single market, establishing the Eurozone, is now actually an obstacle. The system is an obstacle. Despite all the inputs which are given, the fragmentations which in the system lead to very little output. The money spent is impressive, but first of all, it's spent on research, and as we all know, research does not necessarily lead to innovation in markets. Secondly, it's divided over so many sectors and 28 member states, which each want their piece of the cake, that in the end it is meaningless. Governments and public institutions are to blame for this, not the system is at fault, not people. The quality that we have still some progress is due, in fact, to the quality of people operating it. Let me address 2 issues, which in my view are essential for governance innovation, and then I'll speak a little bit what this means, or could mean, governance innovation, because nobody has the answer really, not yet. First of all is ecological complexity. Let us look at Europe's environmental policy. No one will doubt that we need a more sustainable environment, a more sustainable social society. Sustainability is not in the question. There are various forms of sustainability, of course. There's sustainability in environment, there's also sustainable competitiveness, there's sustainable employment. One cannot dissociate them. But in fragmented policy systems, they are dissociated and then become obstacles for one another. That is what is happening at the moment in Europe. But let's return to the environment policy as just one example of how we have gone backward. Once we were a front runner in Europe, in the world, and still today on ecological sustainability, Europe is leading conceptually. Yet it's creating an obstacle in innovation because of the basic paradigm underlying it. Europe follows to achieve sustainability a linear concept, a linear regulatory concept. It's very unfortunate that Europe is dominated by lawyers. I'm one of them, but I've left. Lawyers think in linear ways. They don't think in system ways. And in the 1970s, that was fine. You could start managing the first environmental problems. You remember acid rain, Dusser Oltenev, by this approach. The more you penetrate into environmental management, the more you need a systems approach, which is lacking. Now, climate research in particular, and thanks to ICT, which allows now new forms of massive data management, has focused on ecological systems and on their interdependence. Now, if you focus on ecological systems and their interdependence, you enter a totally new paradigm. Look at the Norwegian government. They have two objectives. They want to protect the ice bear, and they want to exploit the oil and gas. And the Minister of Industry told me, in between these two objectives is the space for research and innovation. The Brussels environmental reaction is ban the oil and gas exploitation to protect the ice bear. Driven by an outdated, unscientific risk concept. So we need there really a massive change. The other challenge is what I call ensuring social stability, because there aren't really 20% people who voted for populist parties. Yes, there are. But there's 60% others of European citizens who even didn't bother to vote. That's a dramatic figure. And the problem is, because we have again a failure of what I call managing complexity. The EU is not to blame for it. It's a very successful transnational organization, but it hasn't focused on the governance of its own successes, on the integration it has achieved. We now have a real fault line between macroeconomic policy managed in Brussels and welfare state mechanisms managed by member states. In a certain sense, the two have become dissociated. You can manage the economy in an abstract way without caring about welfare. And this is the true nature of the unaccountability of the European Union. It is that it's lost the systemic connection to the interest of citizens, which is what should matter first. Of course, one talks about it, but the system doesn't integrate as it should the welfare, competitiveness, employment conditions into the economic policy making. So this is a systemic problem, also one which really can only be solved by new forms of governance, just as in the environmental field. And then I really put my last hope not on any other science than on ICT. Only ICT allows to manage the complexity of modern government systems, the interdependencies between ecological, economic, or social sustainability, between the different levels of government. It's a problem also well known in the US, but because the US is a far more integrated political system, whereas Europe consists of 28 different polities, we advance much more slowly in integrating ICT into governance. We need to overcome these multiple fault lines within the Commission, between the European institutions, between the 28 governments, and between all the other stakeholders in the quadruple helix. Because one cannot imagine a government, a state, like something like a billiard ball, and there are 28 rolling on the billiard table in Brussels. A state is itself a complex setting together. And government power has been evaporating as a result of ICT. Because we are now more connected with citizens around a given issue of other countries, Europe-wide and globally, than we are with our own citizens or government on another issue. So business is a similar example. Even a small startup company, and that's the only SMEs which matter in fact, because 99% of SMEs are in the plumbing sector and in the services sector. Only a small percentage is truly innovative startups. But those who are, think of course immediately in Europe and global market terms. So, but national policy making is still dominated by national paradigms, by short-term electoral cycles. That's why we are fortunate to have, after all, the European Commission. At least we have one governing body which has a 5-year horizon, which doesn't have to worry about the next election, like you have in the European Council, where every time there is an election which holds back decision-making somewhere. So we need to move now to different forms of governance, but we need to move to open governments. Open innovation requires, ladies and gentlemen, open governments. You can't have the one without the other. And that means that governance systems at European and national level need to change from their linear, legalistic, regulatory-driven approaches to an open, collaborative management approach. This brings new forms of alignment, because if we have so many political problems in the European Union, it is because we have failed to align business and governments. We were aligned for 20, 30 years, because the big alignment, the putting the man on the moon vision, was to stabilize peace and economic cooperation. We got it. We achieved it. And what's next? We don't know. It hasn't been decided. It hasn't been brought about. So we need a new process of alignment. We need a new vision in European Union. And open innovation clearly is the method to develop it. Innovating economies, innovating environment policy, innovating sustainability, bringing back employment. They hang together, so we need a more inclusive approach than the fragmented approach of the old government systems inherited from the industrial age, modernized in the 1950s and no longer modernized afterwards. And on that basis, we need to move to forms of collaborative governments. There are enough experimental forms of collaborative governments, and indeed in bits and parcels of the European Union or member states it is applied already. But we need to change it from an experimental in the margin system of governments to a systemic way of doing things. Open innovation requires open governments. It requires, of course, institutional change, which is never easy. Also not in business. It requires procedural change, but the start of it, ladies and gentlemen, is a cultural change. And there I believe Open Innovation Platform can play really a list. So, Messieurs co-chairmen, I've come with a to-do list for you. I really think that you who are involved in open innovation, your social responsibility extends beyond the strict confines of economic innovation. You cannot avoid to address the question of how technology and values, how technology and national and European identities fit together. What is the social impact? In one of the leading Dutch nanotechnology research institutes, every researcher now has to accompany his research with a social impact assessment study. I think that's an excellent idea. We need to change, with the input of ICT, key policy areas like ecological sustainability, climate change and everything related to it. And we need to move to a new form of governance where we apply the open innovation concepts in general to that one slide of it, which is governance, which means how do we look at the different integration and collaboration of the different levels, local, regional, national, European, even global, and the different actors. We can no longer leave this to governments because our actors, businesses and citizens, have already moved to the European level and the global level. The example of crowdfunding is global. So we can take part in it just like anyone else. So where are we with our industrial economy type of funding systems if you have already operating new systems? So we need a fundamental change of thinking about the governing of the framework conditions for innovation. And this is the challenge, Messieurs co-chairman, I leave to you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Stefan, and Martin and Bro have to solve that one by the end of the day. I think we found a truly deserving candidate for President of the European Commission, dare I say, which would certainly shake things up. That was very provocative and fascinating. I'm looking forward to discussion on it. Our final speaker, but very much we leave the best wine here to the last, is Professor Brian McCrath, who's the President of Dublin City University, which is Dublin's and Ireland's University of Enterprise. Brian.
Thank you very much, Peter. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you to Martin, Bror, David and Peter for the kind invitation to speak. I was delighted to accept the invitation, but in the past 48 hours I was not exactly delighted I was doing this, but it's a fantastic way of crystallizing one's thoughts. Just a little bit about myself. I'm a physicist, which apart from meaning I've got no social skills whatsoever and no friends, it means I take a very rational and analytical approach to issues which drive my kids mad. But anyway, I took over as president of Dublin City University in July 2010, so I'm about just nearly 4 years into the job itself. And what I want to share with you is really a pathway, a journey that so far we've come along in terms of how we as a university have tried to embrace and develop the concept and contextualize it locally of the entrepreneurial university itself. Just only one marketing slide. DCU itself, it's a young university. There's only 7 universities in Ireland, all of them public. 3 of them are established in the last 50 years, so they're classified as young universities. We took in our first students in 1980. Strong commitment to research intensity, global engagement. Growing rapidly. This year we've just over 12,000 students, and within 2 years we'll have 16,000 students, representing a consolidation but also a rapid demographic growth, not only in Ireland but particularly in our region. Very globalised Ireland. We've 115 different nationalities on campus. We've strong commitment to high performance as a university, and we're delighted that we're ranked in the top 50 young universities in the world. That is, there's about 1,000 or so universities established worldwide in the last 50 years. And we're delighted to be numbered in the top 50 of those by virtue of a strong commitment to innovation, research quality, teaching quality and employability of our graduates. End of marketing slide. The key focus here is really what's become a debate worldwide, and anywhere I go at the moment there's a dialogue around the value and role of universities, driven primarily by the economic challenges, and I think it's most acute in the US, but it's happening right across Europe, and it's particularly relevant here in Ireland. Are universities acting as a public good? As I say, all 7 universities here are publicly funded. Are they delivering value to society? Are they delivering a impact on society itself? And I think it resonates somewhat with Stefan's presentation there. If you like, the social responsibility, the societal responsibility of universities. My own view on this is that our primary responsibility is to our students, and that the language I use is that we try to ensure that we enable them to flourish in 21st century society, a very challenging society, and I mean in their private lives, in civil society, and in the workplace in particular. But as people involved in education and in universities in particular, we have the absolute privilege, the absolute joy of actually creating knowledge and disseminating knowledge. But I believe that we have a responsibility, a societal responsibility, to ensure that that knowledge is translated into societal and economic benefit. And I suppose this so-called emerging third pillar of universities in terms of translation of the knowledge we create into societal benefit is underpinning the concept of the entrepreneurial university. When I took over 4 years ago, one of the first things we did with the community was to develop a direction, a destination in terms of the vision itself. And I won't go through all the processes in that, but really the language we come up with is what you see here. It's a vision that by 2017 we would have a reputation for this. So it's about metrics, it's about a destination, it's about a journey. But you see the language, what we said was being research intensive, globally engaged, but the bolded language there, a university of enterprise, an entrepreneurial university, and what will that mean? And I'll spend most of my time telling you about the principles underpinning that, and also about some of the specific initiatives which we've embraced in order to deliver on that commitment and really to be able to measure ourselves against specific metrics in that regard. So what is an entrepreneurial university? And I suppose the preparation of this talk, Martin, thank you very much, caused me to really deliberate on that, and it's been very useful. But I've been really quite taken by a group in the United Kingdom, EULP, which is the Entrepreneurial Universities Leadership Programme, and they have actually sought to tackle this, and certainly my own thoughts converged with theirs as I tried to capture this notion itself. The first thing I'd say before referring to the slide is it is an intersection between the concepts of entrepreneurship, enterprise and innovation, and all of those properly defined, but it embraces all of those. But it's somewhat easier actually to explain what an entrepreneurial university is in terms of the entities that it impacts most directly on. And you see here, I think it's first and foremost, it's around the impact internally on our students and on our staff. But it would not be an entrepreneurial university in the true sense if it did not engage actively with the external environment. And I'll spend most of the time talking about specific initiatives against those three elements, what we've done, what has worked, and so on, what we've learned from it. But underpinning all of that, I think, is something which is less tangible, but equally important, and that is the institutional culture and how the institution behaves. And of course, leadership has a lot to do with that, but it's a whole of organisation thing. And I'm always taken by a comment used by some of our commentators in Ireland around culture, and it is that when it comes to it, culture eats strategy for breakfast, meaning that it overrides everything else. One can have the fanciest strategy in the world, but if the embodiment of the institution, the culture of the institution isn't right, isn't aligned, then strategy is worthless. So that institutional culture, I think, is hugely important. But let's look in more detail about what I mean by that. I'm going to start, first of all, with the students. And the key word here is the mindset and the transformation of that mindset. I know what it's like in Ireland. I know what it's like in neighbouring countries to Ireland. I suspect it's the same globally from what I hear from colleagues around the world. But what students learn at secondary school and high school does not really stimulate them for an innovation culture, does not really stimulate an entrepreneurial mindset. And I know there are some exceptions in Europe. I know in Denmark and the Netherlands where they've sought to integrate the ethos of entrepreneurship and innovation within the curriculum right through from the very beginning. We haven't done that here yet, but I think it's important. But certainly we have to actually engage straight away with even first years who come into the university with actually seeking to transform that mindset. How do we do that? I think through a range of initiatives. It's about the curriculum itself. We've one initiative that is working very well for us. About half of all our 3,000 first years take this module called DICE. It's Digital Innovation, Creativity and Enterprise. Really, they start to embrace and think about the concepts of innovation. What does it really mean? And at the end of it, each student has to have created an app that is addressing a problem that they can articulate, which has come from a user, an interface, a society, or so on. And that has a major impact in the thinking and opens up the mindset to independent thinking, critical thinking of our students. We have to provide a framework of opportunities for our students. That can be in terms of hackathons, it can be business plan competitions, a range of that. We also try to expose them to role models, because much of the whole issue and the spark of entrepreneurship and innovation, I think, is best done by those who do it, who live it. And I'll talk about some examples of role models later on. But for me, the most important thing in terms of the lessons learned to date, you learn this and you get stimulated most of all by this through experiential learning, through living the life, the world of the entrepreneur. And I'll tell you what we've done there. In terms of staff, and I mean all staff, one of the things we had to overcome was saying innovation and entrepreneurship is not for those who are doing research only, it's for all staff. And the message we've given to our community is, while not everyone will be or will want to be an entrepreneur, everyone can be an innovator. And I think that message was very important. And the starting point for us was actually explaining what innovation is, and there's a language we use, and I actually thank Intel for this coming up. And it was through discussion with colleagues in Intel here in Leixip outside Dublin. But for us, we say it begins with a clear articulation of the problem statement or the opportunity statement. Once you can define what the issue is, and then it's about bringing creative minds together, best of all if it's multidisciplinary creative minds, coming up with a solution, but most importantly of all, translating that into practice. So the word translation of knowledge is crucially important. But in terms of our staff, it is that fostering that culture. How do we do it? We recognise innovation, we reward innovation. It's now built into our promotional criteria for academic staff. I'll show you in a few minutes, we have annual awards for innovation itself at all levels. But in terms of creating startups and so on, it's very important that we have a range of initiatives which are effective and flexible for our staff at all levels who want to do that, whether it's secondments, access to IP, and so on. But the third element is looking outwards. Those first two are looking inwards in the university itself. But the entrepreneurial university, absolutely crucially in my mind, has to engage with the external innovation ecosystem. And apart from the academic community itself, the other three elements, which is no surprise to you that I would indicate, are enterprise, government, and civil society. So truly, combined with education and academia, it is the quadruple helix. And I believe the entrepreneurial university, in fact, one of the key definitions in my mind is the entrepreneurial university has to be a proactive participant in the quadruple helix. And I think that's a way of actually defining what we must do itself. And just to refer back to Stefan's comments, an example of engaging with the external world and supporting our staff, two of our staff have come to us in recent months with the concept of an Institute for Innovative Government, which we saw straight away as addressing and resonating with much of what you said. So we're supporting that and putting funding in place for that and saying this is exactly what a university, an entrepreneurial university, should be doing. But that's just an example. But that notion of the quadruple helix, I think, really reinforces our concept of the entrepreneurial university. You will also notice that I've underlined three words there: transformation, translation, engagement, and the word enterprise appears again and again across the slides. In fact, when we came to finalise our strategy for the university in 2012, we built it around four core pillars. So when you open this dialogue, this document, it's not around the standard things you'd see in a university strategic plan. They're the four chapters. So I think, again, it's aligning the culture, the vision, the impact with the strategic plan so people understand. So when I say to any of my community, what are the issues in our strategic plan, they're the four words they can reiterate. So even if they never read it again, which often happens with plans, they will know those four words and that they're what's driving our university forward. So let me move forward then to the elements of an entrepreneurial university: students, the staff, and the external environment, and get into specific examples. I mentioned that for students, it's critically important. And really, in presentations earlier on this morning, we heard the language, students are the new entrepreneurs. They're the dark matter of entrepreneurship. They're the new agents of change. And we have certainly felt that. We're committed to enabling those students to flourish. But they're a different generation. This generation, whether you call them Generation Y or the millennials, they are quite different. They're palpably different. For instance, they are more driven by social impact than personal benefit. And again, this is something from colleagues around the world. We all are sensing this. I'm delighted that one of the awards last night went to Bill Drayton, by the way, in terms of social innovation. Students love that, and I'll refer to that back in a second. But they are the new change makers, and telling them that is important empowerment for them and enabler for them. We say to them they should be not simply job seekers when they graduate, they should be job shapers. They should be impacting their own future. They should be rounded graduates. So when I first took over, I spent most of my first year in office talking to all the wonderful employers that we're lucky to have in Ireland, but particularly in this region, and you would have heard many of them mentioned this morning. I spoke to 72 different CEOs and MDs of those companies, and I said to them, are you getting what you want from graduates in terms of their abilities? And they said, academically, everything is fine, but in terms of attributes, it's certainly not the case. And I got a remarkable consistency in the answers I got in terms of what they were looking for. The language varied a little bit from client to client, but that's the language they use there. Creative and enterprising, problem solvers, globally connected, active leaders, showing initiative, effective communicators, and so on. And it's important to point out that I think a university behaving in an entrepreneurial way and stimulating and fostering innovation and entrepreneurship, they're the lessons you learn through experiential learning. And I think that's an important element of that. So what have we done? 2013 became the year when we really threw the switch on embracing entrepreneurship for our students. We, with the support of JP Morgan Chase Foundation, established Ireland's first undergraduate accelerator programme based on the Techstars model from the US. It was an amazing success. The students really ran with it, but in terms of the outcomes of that, after I think about 55 separate entries, we finished with, on the accelerator itself, 7 companies for a 4-month period. Just one example of success. They were all successes. UC Berkeley and Intel run this program every year in October, the Technology to Market Accelerator. They take student accelerator teams, student entrepreneurship teams from around the world. They take 13 of them, 3 of them last year from Ireland, all 3 from this program. They were transformed. The students themselves are absolutely, the mindset you saw in real time in front of you transforming. We also last year, and this is the reference back to Bill Drayton, we became, along with one other UK university, Europe's first changemaker campuses. It's a designation that Ashoka gives to universities that embrace social entrepreneurship. Students absolutely love this, and they really come in excited each day just to be involved in this, and the learning experience, again, absolutely huge for them. We've just launched UStart, which is our accelerator program for this year. We've 8 teams now, started 2 weeks ago on the accelerator program itself. Just to say to you, one of those undergraduate student teams has set up and is running a manufacture of 3D printers, and they've had something like €100,000 in sales since January. These are guys who they're in 3rd year of a 4-year degree. But I think there's something magic there that we can create by fostering that. So let me move on. One of the other things I mentioned briefly is role models. We brought in our first entrepreneur in residence last year. Some of you that are Irish in the audience would recognise James Swelton, who set up and co-founded the amazing phenomenon called Coder Dojo. Just to give you the figures, these are coding clubs for kids as young as the young lady there, from 6 to 16. There are now 400 clubs, dojo clubs around the world in 44 countries. 20,000 students are involved in coding classes every weekend. Not a single cent changes hands. It's the most amazing social enterprise I've ever seen. But he came in and just lived with the students, and it was by osmosis that they learned most of all. So just finished my final comment on that, a great quote from an Irish Nobel laureate for literature, Samuel Beckett, but it's one that addresses this issue of, among the mindset changes, remove the fear of failure. Remove the fear of failure. It's not customary in the Irish DNA, but certainly giving students an opportunity to be entrepreneurs within the safety net of higher education, we think is wonderful. Let me speed up. Around the staff, one of the things we did was actually bring in awards for innovation. We partnered with Fujitsu. These are the winners from last year. But the person on the extreme left is the head of one of the units in our finance department. They were amazed that they could be recognised for coming up with ICT innovations in terms of how finance engages with both the internal staff and the outside world. That, again, was hugely important in terms of instilling the culture itself. So, and as I say, we've built into our promotion criteria in the university. Innovation is now one of the pillars, one of the areas that staff have to consider in making their case for promotion itself. So all of those played a key role in actually establishing that culture. Let me finish off, then we're looking externally. I was delighted that Kel Ryan, co-founder of Ryanair this morning, was with us. His brother, the founder of Ryanair, Tony Ryan, endowed the university with this iconic building here. It's the DCU Ryan Academy for Entrepreneurs. He wanted something that we could do but it would have to be pracademic, not academic. So that combination of practical and academic, and primarily outward facing. This has been an amazing success for us and has impacted externally to the university thousands of individuals. One of the best things we've done was our accelerator program, which naturally enough is called Propeller, as you might expect, but already created over 100 jobs, already has established over 50 companies, and this is just running 3 years. It's ranked number 8 in Europe in terms of all accelerators by the Kaufman Foundation itself. It's got a focus, special initiatives in female entrepreneurs, entrepreneurs within agriculture and farming, which is really embraced, which is hugely significant. But I think we've also started to take the learning of that institute, which is mainly outward facing, back into the university, and our students are benefiting from that now. So that's a huge engagement. The second example of engagement is this. We took over the old Enterprise Ireland site in Glasnevin, 10 minutes walk from the university last year, and we've done 2 things. We've made it the centre of our Greenway Cleantech cluster, which was established in partners with Dublin City Council, Fingal County Council. So it's truly a triple or quadruple helix cleantech cluster in our region, from the city centre out to the north of Dublin. But at the heart of that is our Cleantech Innovation Campus, and you'll see the TechShop logo there. You'll hear from Paul Duggan of TechShop later on, but now working very hard to put that as one of the catalytic impacts in that. That is for, the Innovation Campus is for companies, clusters of companies that can go in there, not necessarily startups of the university. So far, the eight or nine companies that are in there are all external to the university, but what it creates is a forum for engagement, a forum for convergence, a forum for innovation in close proximity. So it's win-win for all involved, but that external look is important. The last aspect of the external engagement, I believe the future of universities is an international network of like-minded universities that actually can cooperate and address global problems. Our major US partner is ASU, and any of you who know that university, it's a huge impact on its state, but particularly in the region of the city of Phoenix itself. But in terms of a model university of innovation and entrepreneurship, we're delighted that they're our major US partner, and they refer to us as their primary European partner. But I think that sharing of information and addressing global issues by that network of partners around the world is crucially important. So let me come to the final slide. In terms of, we've learned a lot along the way. We're not there yet, but I think setting metrics against all of these issues is hugely important, so we know how far we're getting to. So we've set ourselves clear metrics for the 5-year period of this plan itself. We're happy where it's going, but we have learned that culture is hugely important. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. That is certainly what we've learned itself. We've also learned that partnership is crucial, so it comes back to the quadruple helix. We are most effective as an entrepreneurial university by working with colleagues, getting articulation of problems, understanding technology roadmaps, societal challenges, so that we can actually bring the privilege we have as creative mindsets in the university, address problems that are well defined rather than just speculate about what might be interesting. And I think, again, that underpins the entrepreneurial university. And the final word I use, and it's the word that Mark Ferguson, as Director General of Science Foundation Ireland, used. It's about excellence with impact. And I think the entrepreneurial university is truly working when it impacts on the lives of those within the university itself, of course, but most importantly of all, delivers value and impact to the society and the economy around it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian. And our 4 speakers have been excellent because we're on time, so we have time to have some feedback and discussion from the floor. I just want to summarise a little bit. The fact is, this session was looking at living the Dublin Declaration. The Dublin Declaration really pulled together key principles, and people are already putting those into practice, and we've heard some of that. The innovation ecosystem, new business models for the European Union, which includes governance, are part of that equation. The quadruple helix and the involvement of citizens in particular, driving intersectional innovation across kind of sectors, and we've heard about that. Incentivizing innovation and experimentation, not being afraid to fail, and supporting high expectation entrepreneurship, particularly social entrepreneurship that's looking at societal values. So in summary, we've heard a little bit about where the Commission has been moving, and particularly Horizon 2020 and how that can impact on that. Julie then talked about supports that are there for enterprise and entrepreneurs here in Ireland, and many of you are going to join up to have your businesses here in Ireland before you leave. Sorry, London. But and then also we had this challenging call in relation to governance and the model that needs to be developed for the European Commission or the European Union, and the importance of reconnecting or re-engaging with citizens as a key element of that. And then from the education sector, I thought a few issues there that are particularly important in relation to entrepreneurship and innovation. Everyone can be an innovator, not everyone needs to be an entrepreneur, which is very important. And also to have the social impact and the idea that people should become job and society shapers, not just job seekers or society followers. So I'm throwing it open to the floor. Question from here. You might give us just your name, and you can give a question or comment. I'm going to take a few, actually, instead of making it a kind of a tennis match or ping pong match. We'll take a few questions and then pick them up. Is that okay?
Yeah.
You might stand as well, because you look much better standing up.
So this is for Brian McGrath.
Your name?
Tim Schmidt. I'm with a company called Simply Connected. We're new to Ireland, 6 months, so we're one of the people that Julian Simon was talking about coming in here because it's a great place to do business. But what I'd like to say to you, and you didn't mention in your lecture, but first of all, I'd like to compliment you on your IC4 initiative that you have. We're a member of IC4. You talk about open initiative, that's open initiative all the way. And what it is, and he can explain it probably a whole lot better than I can, but they have an organization where we as SMEs and even larger businesses can join. We get into roundtables, we share with their technology, they share with us, what do we want to put in, what do they want to do for us, and you know, it's a very open initiative, and I'm very pleased to be part of the IC4 program.
Okay.
So.
Okay, thanks. Gentleman at the front. I think that's a valediction, actually, Brian, rather than a question. Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
My name is Glenn Meijer. I'm the Dean of University of Amsterdam and also leading the national program on the digital media sector. So we'll have a private conversation on the universities in the break. But actually, I have a question to your neighbor. If I listened correctly, you made some statements on the nature of the people who are supposed to lead Europe in the next move. I heard you saying that maybe we had bankers in the past. Now I hear that lawyers had their time too. And it's actually the ICT professionals that are now challenged to make the move ahead. You may not have suggested that, but that may be my message to my people back home. They will be very happy on that. My question is actually about regions. Could you maybe say something about the importance of regions? In the latest report of the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD, they have said, let's just focus more on what regions actually mention. So these are the spikes in the picture which was shown this morning. Could you maybe comment on the importance of regions?
The importance of regions. Okay, we'll take a couple more. Anastasia?
Thank you. My question goes to Mr. Shepard, please. Thank you for your insightful address. And I'm wondering, how ready is the ICT sector, in your estimation, to this definitely critical endeavor that you suggested, transitioning to open governance? Thank you.
Okay. One more, anyone? At this stage over here at the very back, move away from the front. You stand up and we can all see you, and the mic is coming. You could shout as well, actually. You could sing, but I think the mic might help.
Thank you very much. My name is Ray Duffy. I'm an independent designer. I suppose my question is for Julian and Brian. Stefan pointed out some of the challenges that the European Commission faces, and I'm Irish, and like probably a lot of Irish people here, there's really a lot of commendable things happening, but I'd just like to know, from your point of view, and from your organisations, what are some of the challenges that you see coming down the line in the next few years?
Okay, I'm going to start with Stefan. Stefan, a couple of questions there. Lawyers being replaced by ICT. I'm not quite sure you said that, but it might help your case back in Amsterdam. And is the sector ready if you did say it?
I certainly did.
Sorry, do we have another? Yeah, sorry. Thanks.
We should not fall from one mistake into the other. Instead of having one discipline dominating, we should move to multidisciplinarity. And my call really was for ICT experts to play a greater role in issues which until now, with due respect, they have perhaps not paid much attention to. Just starting from the basic point that governments create framework conditions. They always have done so. So it's in the self-interest even of the ICT sector to do this. And that relates immediately to the social impact the ICT sector has already. If they do not properly analyze this, sooner or later, I see the ICT sector making the mistake the chemical sector made. That's a driver of the modern economy. They fail to look properly at to make an inclusive view of their impacts. And they ended up with very restrictive and costly regulatory frameworks like REACH and others. And the real question about regions, here again, we need to get away from the institutionalized thinking of the industrial economy. If you think about regional governments, then my reply would be they don't matter more than national governments or European governments. If you think about regions as clusters of know-how, then yes, that is a way to look at it. But an economic knowledge cluster, knowledge-driven cluster, may not necessarily coincide with a regional or even a city institutional framework. This is my whole point, that at all levels our institutional frameworks date from the industrial economy, and we are moving into a totally different one. We are having the transition process in political institutional frameworks, which was happening in the 16th and 17th century between the feudal organization and the early modern state organization. And we have to think about this very carefully in order to avoid problems and to benefit as much as possible from the economy. As regards then the final question, is the ICT sector ready for it? My answer is simple, no. No business sector is ready for it, because it's something people don't learn at business school. If you analyze the programs of MBAs at all top business schools, either Europe or America, you can't blame CEOs that they have a blind eye, a blind spot for the public value of the work they do. They can't even explain it. They can explain their market value. They can explain their profitability. They can hardly explain the total societal value of their businesses. And so there too, there is a change process in industry to be taken, which needs to happen, including the ICT sector. They're no better off or no worse than other industry sectors. I think in the end, they are better off because they have a tradition of open-minded thinking. It's in their DNA, contrary to other economic sectors where it's not so prevalent. It's part of the open innovation thinking. It's part of the DNA of this whole ICT sector that they are more open-minded for it. But in the end, it's never driven by an industry sector. It's driven by people. So it's enough to have a number of people in a given sector to drive a change process, taking initiatives such as this and others initiative, and linking up with other people like what I just heard from you, etc. And the work we are doing in the high-level group is in fact proposing to the European governments that they are more serious about creating the framework conditions. That's all what can be done. Create the framework conditions, remove the obstacles, and everything else will follow. Thank you.
And can I ask Julie or Brian, do you want to comment on the question from Ray?
Okay, just a couple of things. I mean, in my presentation, I talked about how Ireland ranks in entrepreneurship, and I think we are considered, and the figures would suggest that as a country we're very good. One of the big challenges, I think, and where we have a bit of ground to make up, is in the whole area of scaling companies. And that if you look at the profile of companies in Ireland, we have a large number of small companies and a small number of large companies, and I'm talking about the indigenous population of companies. If you move out of the food side, we have very few companies of scale. So scaling companies is a massive challenge for all of us. And in order to do that as a small country, we have to make maximum impact and maximum use of all of the resources within the country, which is why something like open innovation is really important if we're to do that. Now, the guy over here talked about IC4, and for example, I think one of the challenges is for people in Ireland, companies in Ireland in particular, and entrepreneurs in Ireland to be aware of all of the things that can help them and accelerate their growth, and that they're there. There's been a massive commitment from government in terms of research and innovation, and it isn't being maximised. So one of the big challenges is to return a maximum ROI on the investment and get a better return on what has been invested. So, for example, IC4, which is one of the technology centres that we've supported in Enterprise Ireland, in recent times when I visited the centre, one of the companies who happened to be there on the day said, I came into Enterprise Ireland, I was looking for a research and development grant, and Jennifer Condon, who heads up the division, said, I won't talk to you about this until you've been to IC4 and you can see what that can do relative to what your plans are. And he said it was the best advice. We completely transformed what we were doing. There was so much going on in the centre which really was beneficial, and we changed and really grew to a much different project, but maximising the benefit of IC4. So I think we have a lot of the building blocks in place. One of the big challenges is for us to join up the dots, and part of that is communication. Part of it is something which Brian referred to, which is role models. So if you see loads of people who are already doing it, and success breeds success. So I would say scaling companies, maximising the return on investment, and communications is a key challenge in order for people to actually be aware of what is there in terms of making it easier to grow, and secondly, just getting a better return from everybody. So that's it.
Well, and I have two more questions.
Just two brief comments. First for Tim. I've never met Tim before, but the cheque is in the post. Tim, just for the benefit of visitors, IC4 is an Irish Centre for Cloud Computing and Commerce. These are Enterprise Ireland technology centres whereby clusters of like-minded companies come together, define a set of problems, and academic researchers can then react to those. So it's very much the articulation of the problem statement built into practice, and Enterprise Ireland have funded a number of these across the country, and they're working extremely well, much like the one you described. To Andre, what are the challenges? The biggest challenge is the interdependence of all the issues involved, and I'm not going to moan about sustainability of education, higher education, but it is a big problem. But making sure government in times of austerity supports research funding, maintains its commitment to that, because if we're generating new knowledge, it's through high quality research we'll do it. So that's important. And the underpinning piece of all of this, and particularly in the digital society, is STEM education. If we don't have adequately educated students coming through at all levels to be the innovators and entrepreneurs of the future, and STEM is so important to that, then it'll all collapse. And I'm at the moment chairing the review of STEM education for government here in Ireland, but we're trying to come up with a set of robust recommendations that will have a systemic change. But this is absolutely crucial.
Okay, perfect. Now, John here, John Doyle, the European Commission.
That's the introduction taken care of. Thanks for that. Sorry, I'll sit down.
You will not. Just stand up like everybody else. Come on.
Yes. Anyway, I just wanted to solve the big problem you put earlier, and I think Stefan alluded to as well, and that Auntie and Bror and myself will have to address when we go back, which is the one about how the public sector adapts. I think there's a misunderstanding in the room that somehow there's this huge, big public sector that's stopping all the wonderful, innovative companies doing stuff. It's not always like that. So let me give you an example. I've tried to find a non-controversial one. This is a bit tricky. So, in the UK 2013, Amazon paid £3 million in tax The revenue was 4.7 billion. Now, my suggestion here is that what we have is a situation where companies are very happy to use paper and the slowness of the paper process, not to play fair across the board. Now, for example, something, and I make this offer now on behalf of the European Commission. Not really, but you get the drift. It would be it's possible for me to say that this is what Amazon earned and what they paid in tax. It's possible for me to say that because of big data, because we all know that they're quoted on the various stock exchanges and so on and so forth. Now, what's actually being paid is something like 0.01%. Now, the European Commission would happily get rid of all the paper, all of it, and suggest, on best estimates, everybody, all multinationals pay 12.5%, that being the Irish, for example, corporate tax rate. On best estimates, let's be mature about the way the world works. Let's change the way things work. This is doable using ICTs. I mean, as Stefan said, this is the area I work on. Internet-ready regulation. It's not so much how do you use ICTs to regulate, it's how do you actually regulate the fact that the whole world is now using the internet. And we should stop saying ICT as well. We should say internet. So the offer is there. So I invite Martin and the multinationals here to come back to the European Commission and sort of say, we will, based on best estimates, pay 12.5% pro rata distributed around Europe. You can do more, you can do less. That's public sector innovation.
Right, there's a challenge. I won't direct it in any particular way. This gentleman here, sorry.
My name is Stenir Björling, one-man company. I would like to be unpopular. What we have listened to here is the need for what we can call the need to decomplexify our societies, the need to have more local connection to what we are doing, because we less and less will be able to maintain and run these very complex societies due to energy resource lack later in the future and mineral resources and everything. And then we are placing very much hope on the SMEs and the innovators and such. And that's all very good and well. But then something called TTIP comes up. And TTIP contains, in its initial versions now, suggestions for regulation that if a large American company finds that a local authority is doing stuff in order to support local innovations or local solutions that are competing out the large corporations' products, they can sue the country and the region for the lost profits. So I would like to directly ask you, in all of these contexts that we are talking about open innovation, have anyone actually thought of if it's even if it's needed in a sense, because it will be neutralized later on by a treaty that actually will nullify very much of this work and these efforts for open innovation. So I would like to ask this panel here, to what extent you have actually looked into this in your plans or in your future thinking, so to speak.
Okay, I'm going to take Richard here, and then we will look at how they add up in terms of questions. I know, Tim, you want to come back in. It's just briefly, because, yes, I'm going to get my
just
cut.
two very quick points. On the entrepreneurial university, I think, I mean, there was a lot of talk also in the questions about focus on ICT and specialization, etc. Isn't one of the big problems that we have that we don't have enough humanities anymore? When people get technical education, they don't understand the world if they just understand STEM. STEM is important, but what about humanities? What about having the broader picture? The second point to Antti, the European Commission has been talking for a long time about entrepreneurship and innovation, but the entrepreneurship programs that the European European Commission has been running were very limited. And Europe is not an entrepreneurial society currently. We are far away. We are an employee society, classical, everything for the employees. But if you are on your own, in most countries, you are really on your own. So the question, has there really been a change in mindset in terms of moving towards an entrepreneurial society from a policy perspective.
Okay, very quickly.
So this would be just in response to your conversation about communication between organizations. And I've been asked to chair a conference that we're putting on either the fourth quarter of this year or first quarter of next year on the Internet of Things in Ireland. And one of the things that I find really interesting is I was just keynoted a conference 2 weeks ago, and the question was, is there any what's Ireland known for? What can we produce for the Internet of Things? And they said, well, there's no hardware whatsoever. It's like maybe we're in the software business. And we're like, really, we've got Nimbus, we've got,
Okay, I said quickly, so.
So I just want to say that the communication part is an area that I think is huge, because we're not even communicating internally between organizations, so therefore we can't even tell the outside world what we're doing.
Okay.
So.
Now, in fairness to Auntie, I want to bring you in on that question with Richard, if you don't mind. There's a question with Richard in relation to trading treaties. I think that's a bigger issue, so I'm going to leave that. Do you want to come back in about the Commission and policy? Now, this is about you guys participating. I know, yeah, but it is also about participation, so we are conscious we have to get to lunch. Annette, briefly.
First, I think concerning transatlantic trade and investment partnership, of course, I think there is a very high ambitions, I think, on both sides whenever the whole of the process was started. I think we are now through the kind of 5 rounds of the negotiations, and I must say that I think that we are far from finished, and of course I think it's kind of discussions back in US as well as in Europe, how we really then scope finally what we are going to agree on that. But of course I think that there are definitely huge potential on both sides of understanding that how we really start to benefit. But of course you are totally right that I think that there are that kind of risks if we are now comparing our systems. We are very different from kind of a regulatory point of view. I think that we are really facing the kind of regulatory convergence as tricky issue. But then concerning the entrepreneurship, I think Richard might be totally right. I think that it has taken small steps towards kind of recognizing the entrepreneurships and how to make it kind of a really policy issue. What are the instruments that we are having available to us in a European Union level, national level, regional, local level? And of course, I think what we have been hearing about is ongoing in Ireland, it's ongoing in Austria, in Finland, etc. And of course, I think now we have been, I think, identifying kind of a policy issues together with the kind of enterprises as in a Small Business Act. It's not really a legal instrument. It's trying to identify the policy issues that we have to address, and then to identify what is the right level of the public authorities really to be active partner. But of course, I think that's where we see certain kind of, let's say, political recognition of the issue. It's much more than it used to be, and I think that we are quite happy for that. And I think that we really believe that I think that's where we have to really work closely with kind of all different kind of layers of the public administration, and especially together with the kind of businesses, because I think that the regulatory environment, for example, for big companies in terms of, let's say, healthcare or kind of environmental regulation, I think that bigger boys and girls can manage. But whenever we are looking at the SMEs, I think the regulatory and administrative burden might be over the top.
Thanks. I want to thank our panel again for their inputs. I want to thank you for your participation, and I want to tell you that you must be back here at 1:45. Yes, must be back at 1:45, or I'm in bigger trouble than I am at the moment. Thank you. Enjoy lunch.